That's wonderful. Make your way back to your seats, please. Thank you so much. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back into the space. Round of applause, please. For the first sessions this morning, which were, I'm sure you'll agree with me, extraordinary. We were thinking about reconnecting, redistributing, reshaping, rethinking, reimagining, and of course, revolution. All of the ways that we can connect together to change the world in a positive and meaningful way. And we're going to continue with that energy with our next panel. Those of you who are coming in, just make your way to your seats as quickly as possible. We have quite a few more to come in. Wonderful. We'll get going straight away. So, for the next hour, we're going to be here in the light room, and we're going to be thinking about how do we tackle extreme wealth. And in order to do that, we've invited a prestigious panel of thinkers and probably optimists as well. Please welcome to the stage the speakers Ingrid Robeyns, Rebecca Gowland, Julia Davies, Will Snell, to be facilitated by Emma Shaw. Please welcome the panel. How do we tackle extreme wealth?
Hi, everyone. How's the sound?
No sound.
No? No sound. How's this now? Any better? Okay. Hi, welcome. So this is a conversation about tackling extreme wealth. My name is Emma Shaw, and what we're going to be talking about today is what are the harms and risks posed by extreme wealth? Why is this important, and why does it matter now? And what should or can we do about it? So on the panel today, we have Ingrid Robeyns, author of Libertarianism, The Case Against Extreme Wealth. We have Will Snell, Chief Executive of the Fairness Foundation, Bex Gowland, Executive Director of Patriotic Millionaires International, and Julia Davies, who's an impact investor, lawyer, environmental campaigner, and founding member of Patriotic Millionaires UK. So just briefly as an introduction, I guess, to why I've been asked to organise and facilitate the panel. I'm leading a programme of work at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation on transforming wealth. And this is focused on helping support a field of practice to emerge in the UK around transformative investment practice, recognising that a lot of that work is already happening already. And we're particularly interested in radically reimagining things like ownership and fiduciary duty and investment practices to put the interests of society and the planet first. And you might know Joseph Rowntree Foundation as a voice on poverty in the UK. So I think what's particularly interesting for this conversation is what is that link between extreme wealth and extreme poverty or inequality, and both of those being symptoms of a broken system that's no longer serving society. And just on a personal level, my route into this is as an entrepreneur. So I'm a co-founder of an organisation called Library of Things, which is a community organisation promoting sharing and reuse in places with local people. And underneath that organisation, what I became really interested in was ownership, and ownership insofar as who benefits from wealth that's created, how is power shared, who gets to have a say, who gets to share. And the experience of trying to raise capital with that business, I guess, made me realise in the context of the private wealth system, the kinds of barriers and blockers that exist in terms of capital really moving into regenerative forms of business. And yeah, I think something like the concept of enoughness, what is enough and what's fair in terms of financial return, really kind of stays with me. So for today and for this session, we've got two questions for the panel. One is about extreme wealth and its harms and risks to society. And the other is, so like, what can we do about it, and getting practical. So I'll kick off with the first question, Ingrid. Why is extreme wealth and wealth inequality harmful to society, and what risks does it pose?
Yes, thanks very much for all of you to attend this meeting and for organizing this session. So I was introduced as the author of Limitarianism, the Case Against Extreme Wealth. I'm also a professor of ethics at Utrecht University, and I also have a background in economics. And in that book, I argue why there should be a cap to private wealth that an individual can hold. And in those arguments, I focus on all the harms that extreme wealth concentration do to society, and actually also, you could say, to the individuals themselves. I think the emotions that we saw this morning on stage are actually confirmed by interviews I did with wealth holders, but I'll focus now on the societal effects. But if you want to hear more about also wider moral considerations, I've written them down there. I'll focus on the three ones that I think are standing out, which is, first of all, that by having and allowing wealth concentration, the distribution of wealth is such that other needs of other people cannot be met. And that is both the case internationally, and basically I can give you some figures, but basically the nutshell is, by having the globalized capitalism that became more neoliberal, but also more global rather than more local, since over the last decades, we always get the story that in the global south, people were lifted out of poverty. And if you have a very low poverty line, it is true that many people were lifted out of poverty. But that doesn't change the fact that if you look at how the benefits of that international cooperation were divided, the global north, and especially the 1% richest people, took the lion's share of what was collectively produced, and the poor were given breadcrumbs. And that meant that if those who collectively produce that wealth, that those who own the capital would take less, there would be more for those who actually are living in poverty. So by having this endless desire to accumulate wealth, we are not allocating the money in a way that would actually meet people's needs. And you can see this globally, but you can also see the effects locally. For example, how seeing housing as an investment object has actually increased the price of housing, and that has made it much more difficult for middle-class people to have their own house, because housing has become an object of investments. So a collaborator of mine calculated that in the Netherlands, and I think the data for the UK are roughly similar, between 1995 and 2025, you needed, in 1995, 4.2 median annual salaries in order to buy an average house. So the annual salary, 4 years, that was the price of a house, and that has gone up to 10. So that just shows very concretely in people's lives how the drive to always accumulate wealth and to go for the highest return really affects other people. I'll be brief on the other two. There's the ecological harms that come with extreme wealth concentration, both in the consumption patterns of the very wealthy. A very, I think, striking figure from the work by Lucas Chancel from the World Inequality Lab in Paris. The average emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in the world is around 6. The 50% poorest people have 1.4 tons greenhouse gas emissions per year. 1.4, and the average is 6. Now, what do you think the top 1% emits? It's 101 tons. And then if you look at billionaires, there was a study that estimated the emissions from the 20 billionaires, and they came to 8,200 tons. So that means that the lifestyles of the super wealthy are incompatible with ecological sustainability, and the number of centimillionaires and billionaires are growing. I'll wrap up with the last bit, which is, and I'm sure others will speak about this, extreme wealth concentration has become a harm for democratic values. The mechanisms are clear from the scientific literature. It's lobbying, it's direct donations, and it's influencing the public spheres. For example, what Rupert Murdoch has tried to do in the UK and then very successfully did in the US. And increasingly, we also see that it's not just undermining the principle of political equality, but also really undermining democracy itself. And some of the super riches are actually trying to exit societies that are democracies. So I think that is something we should absolutely discuss. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Will, over to you.
Thanks, Emma. So my name is Will. I run the Fairness Foundation, which is a sort of think tank that aims to persuade UK politicians that socioeconomic inequality, including wealth inequality, should be a policy priority. Obviously, tomorrow is the budget, so we're fully expecting that after tomorrow's budget, we can pack up and go home, mission accomplished. So just to add on to what Ingrid was saying, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the harms of wealth inequality in terms of our economy and also social cohesion. And we produced a report last year, updated this year, called the Wealth Gap Risk Register, which looks at wealth inequality as a sort of strategic risk to the UK in terms of its impacts on our economy, society, democracy, environment. Negative impacts already realised, but risks of those impacts snowballing in the future, partly because they all interact and partly because we expect levels of wealth inequality, depending how you measure them, to continue to increase. And we looked at how the absolute wealth gap between the top and bottom 10% in the UK had increased by half over the course of the previous decades. And actually that the majority of that increase in the wealth gap is due to unearned wealth, so it's asset price accumulation primarily. Wealth inequality is bad for all of us, not just for those, if you like, at the sharp end, in part because it undermines growth. And we've come up with 5 slightly questionable health metaphors for the ways in which this is done, although I'm yet to be picked up by any medics, but if there are any in the audience, then feel free to quibble. So we look at 5 areas for the impacts of wealth inequality on our economy. One is that it reduces demand, like malnutrition, which starves the body of energy, that the concentration of wealth in few hands reduces consumer spending power, increases poverty, as Ingrid says, and drives up household debt. Secondly, that it wastes talent, and the metaphor of choice here is about cholesterol clogging up the body's arteries. In fact, there's some research suggesting that we're likening good inequality, if you like, inverted commas, not very much of it, but that comes from differences in effort to good cholesterol, and inequality that results from different levels of opportunity to bad cholesterol, and the implication being that the vast majority of the inequality we see today is due to inequalities of opportunity rather than of effort, and therefore bad. Although the danger of that, of course, is it plays into the kind of meritocratic myth that itself is a problem in our society. The third way in which we think wealth inequality undermines growth is that extracting wealth, somewhat like parasites and siphoning nutrients from the body, that companies and individuals control huge assets and charge others effectively kind of rent to use them, so that we're talking about wealth extraction from the economy at the expense of wealth creation. And there's an emerging evidence base that needs more work and needs better communication about how we increasingly live in an economy characterized by wealth extraction rather than genuine wealth creation. A link to that, a fourth impact, is that wealth inequality skews investment, like poor blood circulation, that too much investment flowing to one sector, real estate, for example, is at the expense of investment in more productive sectors, which undermines wealth creation. And finally, that wealth inequality undermines competition. And just as a weakened immune system leaves the body vulnerable to disease, so wealth inequality increases market concentration, and that monopolies and oligopolies reduce competition, increase prices, suppress innovation, and distort growth. And obviously that these things are also, as with many of these issues, you see these feedback loops in place, and Ingrid was talking about the impact of wealth inequality on democracy, that there's a feedback loop in place there where the wealthy are able to frustrate efforts to reform the system, and that then feeds wealth inequality, thus increasing their ability to do the same thing again and again. And of course, the other way in which wealth inequality is damaging democracy is not just in terms of the operation of democracy, but also in terms of public faith in democracy and living in a society in which what you own is more important than what you earn, the ways in which that is reducing public faith in the willingness and ability of politicians to act in their interests, and that has huge impacts on the social contract basically being undermined, has huge impacts on social cohesion, on people's willingness to engage in mainstream politics, people's desire to look for alternatives from elsewhere, and all the other things that we're seeing playing out today. I just wanted to say briefly as well before I stop that while wealth inequality is bad for all of us, it clearly intersects with other forms of inequality in ways that we are only beginning to understand, but in particular in terms of its intersections with gender inequality, racial inequality, regional inequalities, and obviously class, that there's much more that we need to understand and also to socialise around those interactions.
And Bex, what's your take?
Thank you. Yes, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Bex Gowland. I am the Exec Director for Patriotic Millionaires International, which is a network of millionaires who essentially are committed to working on the destabilising impact of economic inequality. And that is really what is caused by wealth inequality, this massive destabilisation. And I wanted just to start with like kind of listing out some statistics that we all might be bored of, but we should know. And I kind of keep in mind when I'm thinking about this, which is 2014, 85 people own the same wealth as half of the planet. By 2019, that was down to 26 people. The top 1% own the same wealth as the poorest 95% of the world. We are on course to hit 5 trillionaires in the next decade. The richest 5 men doubled their wealth since COVID, while 5 billion people saw their wealth decline. There is a whole host of these statistics, and we see this playing out in practical terms too. So the cabinet in the US at the minute is majority billionaires, while 23% of the population is living on less than a living wage. In this country, the richest 40 families have the same wealth as the bottom half of the country put together. And I guess this is not news, you know, that what this wealth shift represents is reduction in life quality for ordinary people, but also for our public wealth. So here, in the last 40 years, we've seen our public wealth diminish from 300 billion right down to last year, minus £1 trillion. These are not new statistics. I am kind of exhausted by saying these statistics. I worked for Oxfam for many years, and they're all kind of generated through their years of work and investigation into this topic. They're not new, they're not news, but we are not acting on them. It was 2009 that the book, The Spirit Level, was released. The Spirit Level that looked at the harms caused by more unequal countries. And they're not new, and we haven't done anything about them, and it actually feels to me like this is a neglected extreme. It's become a neglected extremism to a certain extent. And the implications of that, as Ingrid and Will have shared, are multitudinous. Obviously, we are looking at the demise of democracy. We are watching it with our eyes. We see what's happening in the United States, and it's not just what we see kind of at Trump's inauguration, but as Will mentioned, it is the impact and lack of trust that the public has in democracy now, because they are disenfranchised and they have been neglected for the sake of a kind of small few and a wealth concentration at the very top, which hurts ordinary people through countries around the world. We are witnessing very real health impacts because of inequality. There was a study out in September that maybe some of you saw. It was by Harvard and King's College, and it looked at the neurological development in children and the impacts of inequality on the neurological development in their brains, and showed that in more unequal countries, the higher level of inequality, there is a serious impact on children's brains. They are more likely to suffer from mental health problems, more likely to suffer from depression. And that's not just poor kids, that's the very richest kids too. We are witnessing kind of thousands of species at risk, and people fleeing from climate disaster. As Ingrid said, you know, extreme wealth and those that have extreme wealth are emitting, are responsible for way more carbon emissions than the ordinary person. Social cohesion is a problem, rising levels of civil unrest. We witness it here as well as in other countries. And that is down to the manipulation of media by kind of monopolistic use of media by the very wealthiest people who manage frames and manage how we think and perceive the world. I wanted to mention just briefly as well that on social division, this is something that is really personal, and it's something that we've learned a fair amount about from the people that we work with, the members that we have, the millionaire members that we have. And in a piece of work that we've done that Millie, who's sat at the back, has worked with us on in terms of our work on trying to determine an understanding of when extreme wealth starts, and I'm sure Ingrid and I will speak more about this later. We're trying to understand the point at which extreme wealth becomes harmful to society. And we asked our members, okay, so what value would you put on when extreme wealth becomes harmful? 5 million for democracy, or 50 million for when you have an impact on, an influence on democracy or the legal system or media? The most consensus that we had on a question was around social barriers, social cohesion. 70% of the responses that we got from millionaires said, we feel that at around £5 million, wealth becomes a real barrier to social cohesion and to community. So this problem isn't just a problem for the poorest in society. We recognise that division is sowed because of extreme wealth, and that hits even the richest people, the people that we work with. We all feel untethered from one another because of this huge inequality that we are living with. And I would argue now that we're not in a period of risk, we are in a period of real harm because we are not taking it seriously enough. We have allowed ourselves to be absorbed by kind of a narrative that's been sold to us for 50 years that we have to centre self instead of community. And the greatest risk that is posed to us now is the risk of inaction and the risk of that acceptance just being perpetuated. The harms to us are this disintegration of social fabric and the very real risk that we face to our planet too.
Thank you. And finally, Julia, what's your perspective on this?
Well, so to start with, these guys are all here because they're, they've got incredible academic backgrounds. They are running incredible organisations which are addressing in these issues in depth. They have incredible knowledge. I'm just here because I'm wealthy. And that just tells you everything you need to know about one of the problems that we have. So, when you become a wealthy person, having been someone that wasn't, so my journey wasn't, I wasn't born to wealth. It didn't happen overnight, so my money comes from helping to set up a company called Osprey Europe. We distributed backpacks. But I did have a transitional moment, like a winning the lottery moment when we sold Osprey. So that was basically going from now can go on some nice holidays and, not worrying about paying the mortgage to I've now got some money, what do I do with this money? I guess coming from the background that I come from, so my family are from South Wales, you've only got to go back to my granddad, he was a Welsh miner living in a tiny little terrace house with 10 kids, to getting to where I got to. Having money really was something that I thought about an awful lot, and straight away was thinking about what that meant. And how I've always thought about money is that it effectively is kind of like the keys to the cupboard where we've got all the equipment where we can basically sort out all the problems that we've got. I'm always thinking about our world as like a house on fire. So it's like money gives you the keys to the cupboard where the firefighting equipment is. But equally, you don't have to use your money as those keys. You can use that money instead to basically accelerate that fire and make it worse. You can choose to basically use it to basically accelerate all of the problems that we're facing as a species, as a basically beings that live on this planet, which we are making incredibly unsafe for not just ourselves but for everybody else. So money is this, it's incredible privilege. But I think if you're someone that actually gives it some thought, I think it comes with responsibility. You can just use it in such a way that, you can just use it and you can follow this narrative that actually I need to protect my family. That means I need to make more money with this money that I've got. Or if you're someone that's sort of come at it and this already is like a lot of money, you know, and you're thinking about what I do with that, you can see it as a way in which you can actually achieve some great things. And so that's what always been my focus. So I said these guys will give you sort of, you know, the real detail of all of this. I'm quite basic. And so I'm speaking to those in the room who are wealth holders or are people advising wealth holders that these issues can seem really difficult. They're so vast, you know, the conversation beforehand about how fundamental, how all of these issues go back to so much. And, you know, this isn't just about, you know, allowing people to put some food on the table and not be worrying about their energy bills. We have whole systems which are basically resulting in inequality, not just staying as it was, not just not getting any better than it was, but getting worse, you know. So we're actually we just looking at Britain, you know, because my head can only cope with that at the moment, is, you know, we were doing better. You know, our parents and our grandparents were all able to contribute to making things better in this country, and we're now sliding backwards. We're now sliding back to a time where we're even just at the most extreme seeing Victorian diseases coming back. You know, we're seeing cases of scurvy and, you know, rickets in a very, very wealthy country. So this all shows you that, you know, like this extreme inequality is something that's almost got out of control. So I've ended up basically not effectively working for her. And honestly, she's a hell of a boss, honestly. Because I went from being someone that was just 100% focused on climate and nature loss and basically pollution, because that's, you know, I've been a member of Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace since I was a teenager, since I first had a bank account, and I've always understood what we were doing to basically make life very unsafe for not just ourselves but everything else that we share our world with. So then really, really understanding how all of this comes back to inequality, which is just getting more and more extreme, and unless we address that, we can't really address all of the other things. And I think that now we're at a point in this country, again, because, you know, I'm that small-minded, where this is almost stopping us achieving everything else, because we have people in this country that feel utterly left behind. They really feel that nobody's been listening to them, and they're right, because you know what, you know, like if you look outside of London, there's a hell of a lot of places that have been forgotten about, and they haven't been really, you know, the fact that things have been getting worse for them for a really long time. Oh, sorry, that's my 5 minutes. It's basically, I'm going to quickly finish this off where I was going to. It's basically leading to a situation where we are now having to refight battles that we really should not have to fight over and over again. We see it massively in America, but we're seeing it over here. So things like, you know, about getting to a society where, you know, we want to address discrimination and we want to basically give everybody opportunities. We're now having to fight those battles again. We hadn't sorted it out, but now even the question of whether we sort that out is being questioned. As women, we're having to fight battles about whether or not we can decide what to do with our own bodies. All of these things are happening because we have this entire incredibly powerful group of people, a relatively small number of group of people that are absolutely determined to hold on to their money at any count whatsoever, and they are not going to allow anyone to say we've got to do things differently because actually you're making life really unsafe in this world. And that's what it comes down to. So it does come down to wealth inequality. Sorry, Emma.
No, you're fine. Oh, I can kind of sense the room is like, oh, it's a lot. I guess it's a gloomy picture, and it's a heavy-hitting set of stats and stories, and, you know, everything from, we talked about housing, poverty, ecology, society, democracy, growth, even childhood development, and how extreme inequality is bringing harm, not just risk, in society. Really keen that we move on to so what then? So what is the potential to do something different? And the question I'm going to bring to the panel now is, what can we do practically to change this picture? In particular, to mobilise wealth holders and wealth advisors towards action. And yeah, keen to hear, I guess, stories of hope, opportunity, what's going on, who's doing what can the room engage with after this. So I'm going to actually come back to you, Julia. Yeah, what's your
Yeah,
take
brought
on
everybody
practice?
down, so let's bring everyone back up.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to tell, I'm not going to set my alarm this time. So that comes back to the fact that money is basically the keys to that cupboard where we can basically address all of these things, and we absolutely can. So I really loved the comment from one of the people in the previous talk where he said that the problem with philanthropy is it makes people feel better when they shouldn't feel better about having considerable wealth. And that's absolutely right, because it's just not enough. So very quickly I had a concept that basically we need, if you're an incredibly lucky person to have wealth, you need a whole wealth approach to what you do with it. A bit of philanthropy is not enough. So, you know, when I came into money, I was determined that I was going to set some money aside for old-fashioned philanthropy, but that was going out the door very quickly, and it did. You know, so the money I set aside for philanthropy, I got that out the door within about 4 years. But then, of course, then I started working for Bex and, you know, really thinking about this issue about tax. And you can't, you know, there are a lot of people that love to talk about their philanthropy. They do not want to talk about tax. And I've just been thinking about lately that actually, in the absence of fair taxation of wealth, and if in the absence of us basically having a system where we are generating enough in tax to pay for everything that we need for a functioning society, what we actually have is that we have the population that are effectively paying tax to these multi-billionaires. But that money isn't going on hospitals and schools and everything. It's going on Jeff's, like, you know, phone party on his super yacht. And that's where we need to sort of really be thinking about this, because people are effectively, you know, with the fact that they cannot now buy a house. You know, who mentioned sort of like, you mentioned the stat about what you needed to buy a house in 95 or something. Well, that's roughly when I came out of university, and I was able to buy a house within about 2 years of coming out of university, because I came out, wasn't from, you know, banker dad, I came out with no debt because there weren't university fees then, and I was able to get a 100% mortgage, and actually the house then was affordable for two people that were just in work and not earning that much money then. And these are the things, so whilst we have this situation where we're allowing wealth to accumulate in the hands of a few people, and those people, as our wonderful Gary Stevenson always explains, those people have got money, they've got to put it somewhere, so they're buying everything. So then we have a situation is, instead of a young couple being able to buy a house and they are then enjoying it, as my dad always said, my dad was a builder, you enjoy your house, you live in it, but it's also your security for the future, they're stuck in renting, and so they're stuck basically paying a tax to wealth, which is then accumulating. And we're basically in a snowball effect where things are getting worse for most people. Oh God, I didn't say the positive bit.
Well, is there any...
I didn't do the positive bit. But you can use your money to do all the positive things, which there is so much. And it's not enough to invest and just do a little bit with the money you make out of it. You can basically get your money out there, and it can be achieving so much. So I'm just going to quickly mention community energy, because we've been talking about changing the system, and the system means changing who owns the things that we need. And we need houses, we need food, and we need energy. And community energy is the hope. If you want one thing, a bit of hope in all of this, we can change who provides our energy. You can't own an oil rig, you can't own a coal mine, basically, as a community, but you can own, basically, solar panels on lots and lots of roofs and wind turbines, and you can basically have communities owning their energy.
We might come back to the tax thing in a bit, I think. So, Bex, over to you. What's giving you hope? What's going on? Who's doing what?
Yeah, I feel so much hope. There is a lot to be done, but there are lots and lots of people doing it. I think the first thing to say is what we're not going to do and what we shouldn't feel hopeful about. Nobody who's working on new economy ideas or on tax, which I will talk to, is saying to millionaires and wealth holders, you are going to have to be poor to fix this, right? That is not the solution that anybody's looking for. We're not looking towards destitution. So we need to all recognise that out loud, because we're often told, you know, you want these wealth creators to be, you know, to be impoverished. It's just not the case. And no one is asking wealth holders and millionaires to give up, to just do stuff with their money. As Julia said, philanthropy is something good to do, but it is not the solution. We need systemic change. And for systemic change, we need people to use their voice and their influence. Yeah, Julia is extremely good at this. And if we were talking about bosses, actually, I think it's the other way around. But the first thing that we can practically do is understand wealth better. We do not understand what wealth is. There are so many numbers and that are thrown out there, and actually I think it's obfuscation. I think it leads to us, and it leads to inaction, because we do not understand what extreme wealth is. So the first thing that we're trying to do, and we're working with Ingrid to do this, is to establish what metric is it that actually determines when the harms of extreme wealth kick in. We're talking about the Extreme Wealth Line Initiative. And we need that number, we need that metric for people to understand when extreme wealth becomes harmful. We need it to push back against that obfuscation and that inaction. And to reframe how we see wealth, how we understand wealth as being something that has the power to be good and the power to not be good as well. And that's why we're pushing for this number, because it really will help us understand wealth better. It will help us understand wealth better in the face of kind of very, very long situated frames and learnings about what wealth is. And when you've got the newspapers, the governments, businesses, schools and universities telling you that kind of the economic orthodoxy is what we should all buy into, and we all have to have more and more and more as individuals to be secure, then it's not surprising that our kind of brains have been programmed in a certain way. We need to program them differently, and that's what we're really determined to do. I see loads of change happening. This conversation is happening in places that it never used to happen. We were just talking in the green room before about the fact that Ingrid was mentioning the DG in Europe is having this kind of conversation around wealth inequality. It's changing, but we cannot expect one big idea to land in our laps and for that to be the panacea for this problem. This is work. This problem requires us all to work at it and to keep working at it bit by bit by bit. It is the hope that I feel comes in the small actions that people commit to. Firstly, obviously, from partner organisations, like working in the new economy environment is so affirming as a human being, because there are so many individuals, I can see some in this room, who are working towards a new economy, and they're doing it together, whether it's civil society, local groups, young people. There's a whole breadth of kind of organisations working for what we want to see in the future. More importantly, from my particular perspective, it is the millionaires that I work with that are brave and ready to go on the telly, on the radio, on social media, ready to have an opinion piece in a newspaper, ready to say that we need systemic change. We need more Julias, Priyas, Doros, Gios in the world to be taking up this challenge of challenging the orthodoxy that we are all kind of committed to at the minute. Because it isn't just philanthropy that we need to have, it is absolutely that systemic change. And I will end with kind of the transformative stuff that has happened over the last 2 years as a piece of hope that I live with every single day. And that really is about taxation, right? Like, if you're asking me, and it's unbelievable, but one of the easiest wins that we're going to see is on tax, how we tax wealth on new economy issues in the next few years. In the last 2 years, we have seen some serious changes in how people perceive the issue of taxation. 75% of the public support higher taxes on wealth. We polled millionaires in the UK, not our members, UK millionaires, and 80% of them said that they support a 2% tax on those with 10 million or more. The most kind of visceral example of what practically people can do and the energy that people are putting into this change happened in the last 2 weeks. We took a bus that said, tax us the super rich. We took it from Scotland and it moved all the way down the country and arrived in London last Wednesday. And people like Julia turned out in the sleet, in the rain, in the wind, and were there to represent with local media, local politicians, national media, national politicians, and influencers to project this mission. Now, we've had a massive impact on the narrative change, and it is those tiny actions, it's coming out in the sleet, that gives me hope. And I think we should be hopeful for the future because good change is coming.
I think the mood is lifting a little bit. I can hear it when I whoop. Will, I think I'll come to you next.
Thanks. So I just wanted to build on what Bex was saying about wealth holders and wealth advisors using their voice and influence. So We do a lot of work around what government can do to reduce wealth inequality and also reduce its negative spillover impacts. And our wealth gap risk register details, I think, like 33 different things that government could and should be doing, precisely none of which I expect them to see doing tomorrow, which basically fall into three categories. So one is taxing wealth, more as Bex was saying, whether that's reforming existing taxes on wealth or introducing new ones, so basically redistributing wealth. Then there's a second group of policies around so-called pre-distributing wealth, horrible phrase, sorry, but basically how do you spread wealth more broadly across the economy to start with, get wealth into more people's pockets more evenly before you have to rely on the tax system to correct for it, and there are lots of ways you can do that. And then thirdly, how do you reduce the sort of importance of wealth inequality for people's lives, which is partly about the absence of wealth being less bad for people's life chances and outcomes in terms of public services and social security and so on, and partly about how do you reduce the influence of the wealthy on politics. And, you know, in terms of the barriers to achieving all these changes, I mean, you know, there's probably 15 or 20 we can come up with in terms of what's holding politicians back from introducing some of these policies, including, you know, short-term firefighting and, you know, public attitudes, kind of work for and against some of these changes depending on the issue, etc. But clearly the sort of regressive lobbying of the so-called wealth defense industry is a big part of that. And this broader sort of narrative in the media and in politics and places around that, around wealth. And so I think that progressive wealth holders and advisors have a really interesting opportunity to try and help to change the narrative, change the weather, if you like, around those conversations. And I mean, I used to work on tax justice, and before I was involved, back in the early 2000s or even the late 90s, the whole idea of tax avoidance was this kind of, you know, this was sort of forbidden conversation that people had at the back of conference halls like this, when all the conversations were about corporate social responsibility, and it was all kind of, you know, kind of hush and tutting when someone raised tax avoidance. And now that conversation has completely changed, and tax avoidance, unless you're Donald Trump, is no longer seen as smart business. It's seen as, you know, as being bad for society and for the economy. And so I think there is an opportunity for wealth holders and advisors to push these new narratives about, you know, about wealth inequality and its harms, and to talk about, you know, ideas of, I mean, I don't know, there's the kind of cholesterol idea that, you know, that wealth that's concentrated in ways that don't allow people to maximize their potential and realize opportunities is bad for all of us in all sorts of ways. And so I would be really, you know, I'm really hopeful that we're seeing pockets of these sorts of activities spring up, especially among people in this room. And so my hope, I guess, is that we see more of that. We see more, you know, genuine wealth creators calling out wealth extraction. We see more people who've achieved, quote unquote, success in life, acknowledging the role of luck as well as hard work in getting them to where they are. And our founder, Julia Davies, had an article in The Guardian on this topic last week, as well as calling out, you know, the undue influence of wealth on our politics and society. So that's my hope for the future.
And Ingrid.
Yes, I actually agree with everything that has been said. I'll try to synthesize it, but also take one step back, which is, I think anybody involved in this conversation, we should start from the answer to the question, how did we get here? Why are we seeing this increasing wealth inequality and the fact that taxation has become more aggressive, that there's all these loopholes, many more, and indeed, as you said, like it's becoming unaffordable for ordinary people to, for example, buy a house. And so that means that that is necessary, because otherwise somebody who is a wealth holder may think, oh, I made this by myself. So they may buy into the neoliberal ideology, and then they may think, oh, I'm going to do something good. I'll buy like 1,000 malaria nets. That's not a solution, also for reasons that others have given, because the solution should be structural. So I think in the end, anything that any of us or any of your clients do should contribute to either changing the economic system, and that can be very diverse. For example, we need to have conversations about new ownership structures of companies. The Zuckman tax proposal that was really meant to be a way for, given that capital is still mobile globally, to do something about that and to make sure that billionaires and centimillionaires pay their fair taxes. So first, new economic system. Second, we need new narratives, or you could call it a new ideology. And why is this important? Because the way we got into the mess we're in now didn't come by accident. It was because there was an orchestrated attempt by thinkers, who are called neoliberal thinkers, to plant ideas such as, for example, the thing you mentioned, Will, about luck. They are not talking about luck. Everything is your own dessert. So the whole idea of meritocracy was spread, and also the fact that economic freedoms, understood as not being interfered with what you want to do, that should be the most important value together with efficiency, and it would trump everything else. So we need new narratives and a new ideology. And anything that could add to that would also be good. And the third is, I think we need to shift social norms. So if somebody really does tax evasion, I think we should shift the perception in the peer group and in the wider public sphere from, oh, this is smart, to, no, you should be ashamed because you're not contributing your fair share to what societies need. So if that is the end goal, to change those three things, then I think we can do at least 5 strategies if you are a wealth holder, or advising a wealth holder. And the first was really relates to the last session here on this in this room, which is reparations. If the wealth that somebody has is actually tied back to immoral practices, including enslavement, but it could also be different, the answer is definitely not philanthropy. The answer is reparations. And that is a difficult conversation to have, because I guess many wealth holders just are not there yet in terms of the information they have and how they regard the moral status of their own wealth. The second is, I think we should copy the strategy of the neoliberal patrons, those who funded the neoliberal thinkers and their think tanks. For example, the Mobilise Society was pivotal in changing the way we look at the economic system, and ultimately also, I think, played a role in how we got where we are. So we need those kind of institutions or initiatives that change the ideology. The third is that we need to use wealth to strengthen our democracies in whichever way, because wealth is now currently eroding democracies, and we might be getting into sort of a vicious spiral whereby it will be more difficult to combat wealth inequality, because the parties that get elected by means of, I guess, misleading and propaganda and all the extreme right tricks make it harder to have the policies that we need to address wealth inequality. So I think, for example, what the German, Austrian heiress Marlene Engelhorn chose to do with her wealth, to organize a citizens' assembly, and especially to start a debate in society about the fact that inherited wealth is actually purely a matter of luck. That was, for me, that was a political act. It was also a redistributive act, but most of all, it was political. So that's an option too. The fourth strategy is to use wealth to show how that better economy, that regenerative economy would look like. Because we also need examples to counter those who say, oh, but it's impossible. We can only have this kind of capitalism. We can't have, for example, any sort of needs provision that is collectively made. So anything that also helps to make that clear that it is possible helps. And finally, I think there's also the strategy that Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' ex, used to just give the money to those on the front line of injustices. I think there is epistemic value to this, because you basically recognize that you as a wealth holder do not have all the knowledge that you need to counter injustices. So I think that is also a strategy that I think makes sense and will make a difference. And finally, I'll close by saying that when I wrote this book, I've been contacted by wealth holders, and some of them were isolated. They said that it was the first time they were speaking to somebody about the fact that they felt there was something wrong about them having so much money, or they felt one of them spoke about coming out, and actually that person now joined the Millionaires for Humanities and has been giving speeches. So that means that those who are wealth holders have also an opportunity to reach out to those wealth holders that are not yet, let me just call it, political. So just reach out to them, start a conversation, and then get this conversation going, because I think we may not really know how many of the wealth holders are what you could call still politically on square zero. They need to first to be brought into the conversation and gradually become part of this movement.
Okay, so we're going to come to anyone in the room in the last 10 minutes or so for questions or your ideas. But in an attempt to kind of summarize that slightly, some of the things I've scribbled, what can we do practically to change the conversation on extreme wealth and change the system? It sounds like there's something to do with the conversation itself, so narrative change and ideology and social norms around wealth and taxation. We've got very practical tools like metrics, extreme wealth lines, and I suppose something about lots of hopeful activities happening in pockets, and there's some hope to be had in lots of small actions and movements, collaborations coming together. We've talked about brave wealth holders on buses, brave wealth holders moving money, I guess, in ways that are congruent with their values or the origins of that money. So whether it's reparations or moving money to frontline injustices. And we've touched on a bit the role of government and the power of lobbyists protecting this wealth defense industry, as it's sometimes called. And I think a kind of call to action around these solutions should really be about the structures within the system as opposed to the sticky plasters. So yeah, really keen to hear from anyone with burning questions. I think there's somebody here for the panel.
Hi, and thanks for the panel. My name's Kojo. I'm from Black Lives Matter UK. From what we've heard, and we've talked about, the clear changes that are needed, structural changes that are needed, whether it's taxation, whether it's how wealth holders view philanthropy. One of the things that we haven't talked about much on this conversation, that has been mentioned in an earlier conversation, is the context, the political context that we're in, and that of white supremacy. That those who are defending wealth, they are on the offensive. They are mobilizing their wealth to fund far-right movements that are taking power across the country, across the world. And in terms of what we are wanting to prescribe or to recommend, it is against that context of far-right and racist violence, right? And we know that, obviously, those who invest in those things know that that is a form of how they build power, but also how their wealth is protected. It's through this racist violence. And so what I want to ask and the panel to talk about is about power, the nature of power, and how we mobilize democratically and in our communities to build a counterforce to the far-right movements that we're seeing that is advocating a shrinking of the state and a mobilization of state power towards more racist violence to migrants, to marginalized people of all backgrounds. And one thing I'll say is a little example to that. We heard Will talk about, how taxation or tax avoidance became sort of popular, but that was partly through direct action, right? There was movements like UK Uncut that I and I'm sure many people here may have heard of, that I was part of. That helped change the conversation. It wasn't just people at the top talking about it. It was people from below agitating and fighting for it. And so I would urge people to think about, how do we support and fund those movements today? Thank you.
Yeah, should we take a couple of questions and then perhaps panel can respond?
Well, thank you so much for this panel. One of the things that really I'm taking away from this is, for me as a financial planner, wealth manager, financial advisor, however you want to describe me, is how we need to fundamentally think differently about what our purpose in this chain. And I think what Ingrid so wonderfully put is, she created this space for wealth holders to actually feel seen in their qualms or feelings about their money. And I think a lot of wealth holders walk into a room of somebody in a pinstripe suit, to categorize all advisors as men and in suits, where the profession has said to these advisors that their worth and the only way that they make money is to provide loads of solutions to clients without actually understanding what the client wants. And I think creating this space for wealth holders to say, actually, this is how I feel about my wealth and this is what it means to me. And for the advisor to be able to hold that and say, where do we go from here and how can I help you actually achieve what you want to do, is fundamentally different to the way these sort of hourly charging, AUM charging, and all these things are currently happening. And so I think, it's really, I know what I'm going to talk to, what I'm going to say to my peers in my profession about this.
Thank you. Okay, so 2 brilliant questions. I wonder if we start with the first, around power and populism. Would anyone like to respond?
I can have a stab, but there's not one single answer to this. It's really, really hard to know how to push back against this, especially when we all recognise that there is an inordinate amount of money being pumped into this machine, this political machine, and it is succeeding because it's defending power where it sits, and it's terrifying, right? I was saying in the green room before, at my kids' school, there's an incident yesterday, and if you look on social media relating to that incident, it's a violent incident, or the potential for a violent incident. Loads and loads of parents are on social media saying it's because this kid has been converted to Islam, or it's because this kid has come from a Pakistani background, right? Now that is 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, you would never have heard that, right? It's just, it wasn't allowed. Even if people felt or thought it, it wasn't allowed to be said out loud. Now it is, because the veneer of progress has been ripped away by power that is established. And I suppose as an individual, however terrifying it is, we all have the responsibility or the duty to challenge that where we see it. I'm not saying go out and search for it, but if you see it, you have to challenge it. So that's the first thing. I think that there is something to be said for recognising that there is a linkage between power and wealth and all of the other inequalities that exist. Like, that's what we're all trying to do that. We're all trying to make sense of these things together. We're completely non-partisan as an organisation, but if you look at perhaps how Zach Polanski is doing things at the minute, we're trying to just be outspoken about the various inequalities that are connected to the wealth extreme, then that's something that maybe we, all political parties and all of us as individuals, can learn from too, just having the bravery to be able to say like these things are connected and we need to be working on them together. And then, we need some really, really rich billionaires to stick the money at this end rather than that end, I suppose, if we want to be really reductive about it. Yeah, well, I don't know the answer.
I don't think we just need, this audience is connected with wealth holders. Yeah. But the question, as I heard it, was also like, what about grassroots movements of not wealth holders? And I totally agree, without everybody, every citizen, we're not gonna achieve this big change that we need. And the thing with neoliberal ideology is, we only touched upon it, but it changed the way we see ourselves. It has basically transformed us into seeing ourselves constantly into these economic roles. So Julia gave the example that when you went to university, you had no debt. I mean, I think it's a scandal that our young people have to get into debt in order to study, but the rationale is that it's an investment in your future earnings. So it's all these economic roles that are projected on us. The alternative, which goes back all the way to Aristotle, is to see ourselves as citizens. And as citizens, we have a duty, and it's also a privilege, and it can bring joy, to organize ourselves and to become active as citizens. And there's so many causes that all feed into this new world that we need. So I totally agree with you that some of these changes will come from the bottom up, and what we need is for everybody, whether somebody has wealth or not, to take on this role as a citizen and to spend a bit more of our time in that role as a citizen, i.e. to be an activist.
Yeah.
Okay. And if I can just add to that, one of the books that I read recently that's, I thought, well, yeah, that's absolutely right, was a book by the founder of Hope Not Hate, and trying to sort of basically analyse what's going on with reform. We may be, not against any particular party, but, that doesn't help stop me talking out. But what the chapters that really resonated with me, because I was already completely, frankly, gutted with what was going on in Caerphilly, which is where my dad is from. So Caerphilly is, former mining town, a classic example of many communities. It's not one of the most deprived areas in Wales by any chance, but some of the most deprived areas in the UK as a whole are in Wales. And basically Reform were absolutely, they're going after Wales, but they were really going after Caerphilly. And Hope Not Hate were involved in basically keeping them at bay. So thankfully they didn't succeed in that particular election. But what really came through in that book was the connection between those parts of our communities who feel utterly left behind, because they have been utterly left behind, and support for reform, because they are supporting reform not purely on a racist basis. They are supporting reform because they are being told that they are reform. They bloody nicked our name. That's what really annoys me. They nicked our name. They are not reform, but they are telling people that they are reform. They are telling people that they are not the establishment. We know they are the establishment. They're more establishment than the establishment. And that's what makes me so angry, that they are basically, fooling people, but they've been allowed to do that because there are so many people that have been completely left behind. So that comes back to that we absolutely have to address this inequality. And there is the really high-level stuff, and there is basically sorting out taxation. But as wealth holders, I am going to say this word again because it's the one thing that gives me hope and gives me, this is what I'm focused on at the moment, is community energy. Because community energy is energy, something we all need. We all need to keep warm. We all need to basically cook our food. It is energy that can be owned by the community and benefit the community. And I think behind all of this, behind of this sort of backsliding on basically addressing racism, behind the backsliding of addressing sort of, basically the position of women in society, the position of anyone disadvantaged in society, is these forces that are trying to hold on to extracting wealth from oil and gas for as long as they absolutely can. Everything else is a distraction, so we've got to fight that instead of actually fighting for our lives, for us and everything else that lives on our planet. So that's why this is so beautiful, because we are literally taking money out of, and I use this term all the time. Whenever I talk about oil and gas, I talk about mostly foreign-owned oil and gas. And I do that because of reform. Because reform are telling people that renewable energy is we can't afford it, and it's these liberal elites that just basically want to sort of waste your money on it, and they're taking money out of your pockets. But it's the absolute opposite of that. They are defending basically oil and gas profits, and doing that by making us fight amongst ourselves. And that is why it is so nasty. But that's why community energy is so lovely, because it's sticking it to them.
I suspect we're going to have to wrap up, and we only got to one question, which I think means we could have probably spent a few hours. There was a question that did go unanswered that I would encourage everyone to chat about and bring to each other around for financial and advisors and planners. From what I heard in the question was, what can you do to be able to uphold those kind of very human values of a wealth holder looking to mobilise their wealth to action? So yeah, thoughts on a postcard. Please share, please discuss. Sorry we didn't get to talk about it as a panel, and I think there was a lot of other questions that we didn't get onto as well. So yeah, huge thanks to the panel. Thank you all.
Thanks everybody. What an incredibly empowering and thrilling discussion. We're now going to go to the lunch break. If you have any allergies or dietary requirements, and you'll be going that way to the right, but there's food in both corridors, and we'll be back in here at 1 p.m. and I'll come and get you. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch and your conversation.